Shields up, Iron Breakers. Rurikhan here coming at you with another video, and today we're going to be talking about Rise of the Ronin. This title was sent to me by PlayStation Portugal so that I could give it a look and tell you guys my opinions on it. Now at this point, I've played around 45 hours of the game, which is more than enough for me to have experienced the majority of all of the activities that you can have out in the open world, if not even all of the activities that you can actually do in the open world, as well as a decent enough chunk of the story of the game. I was not able to finish the story naturally because this is an open world game and I didn't want it to beeline through the whole thing. I want to go ahead and experience everything that the game has to offer so that I can offer my impressions from a more balanced perspective than just, hey, here's what the main mission was like. At least that is my opinion on the whole thing. Now, I did a preview previously. It was based on my first 4 hours of gameplay. I couldn't really talk about anything outside of that, which was extremely limiting, but to be honest, now that I've played 45 hours of the game, my opinion hasn't really changed from that initial video. I wouldn't change anything that I made in my initial preview of the game because that is exactly how I felt at that point in time. However, I almost wish that they had let me speak more about some of the things that I had experienced in the game at the time, because by the time I made my preview video, I had actually played around 10 or 12 hours of the game, and I had a lot more context that I wanted to add to that preview, but I simply wasn't allowed, because there were a lot of things that I actually enjoyed about the game, but those were things that came after the preview window that I was given for the embargo. So naturally, this is going to be the video where we're going to be covering those. So let's start by talking about what exactly can you expect from Rise of the Ronin. And essentially, I almost feel like this is Assassin's Creed meets Neo, because that's kind of the way that I've been tackling the game. I've been doing a lot of stealth. I've been doing a lot of jumping on top of rooftops with my grappling rope and basically trying to take out as many enemies as possible from a stealth position. Now, this is not the only way to play the game. You can just tackle everything head on if you want to. With the exception of some missions, I think some missions do require stealth and do require you to not get detected, as well as there's also missions that require to use non-lethal force, which is another option that you can do in the game, but the reality of that is you just have to use a weapon that deals a little bit less damage, which is called a training weapon. So instead of using a weapon with a blade, you're using a weapon that's supposedly made of wood. But in my case, I was actually using a bayonet, which is a rifle. So I'm just going to assume that they were loading the ammunition with rock salt or something, because some of my executions are basically a point-blank shot to the face. And if that doesn't kill somebody, I don't know how that works unless I'm shooting them in the face with rock salt. So maybe they won't die, they'll just be scarred for life. Either way, suffice to say, I think that the game is pretty fun. And this was one of the things that I actually mentioned in my preview video as well. I said, hey, I think this game is fun, but at the same time, I also think that the game feels dated. And this is particularly when it comes to the visuals. And I've told people about the visuals, and a lot of people said, you can't criticize Team Ninja about visuals. And I'm just like, I can't do what now? I think that is completely ridiculous. You can criticize anybody based on visuals. It's just a matter of how much they actually matter to the overall experience. Which, in my opinion, in this case, they do matter, because at the end of the day, this is an open world game. And open world games, you know, you're expected to kind of like, oh, let me take a look at the vistas and see how beautiful this world is and how much it invites me in. And in your early impressions, when it comes to this game, most likely you're going to end up the same way that I did, which is like, wow, I wasn't expecting to see a game that looks like this in 2024. But I also pointed out it is not a deal breaker for me, and it has not been. I've been playing the game pretty much every day because I still enjoy playing it. I am enjoying myself with some of the mechanics, but at the same time, another question that I was asked quite a bit in my previous video was, hey, does the combat stack up to Neo 2? Which actually led a lot of people to tell me, hey, you just wanted this to be Neo 3. The reality is, no, I don't want this to be Neo 3. I want this to be whatever game Team Ninja wanted to make. But the question that people asked me was, does this game stack up to Neo 2 in terms of combat? And in my opinion, it doesn't, because the combat is much more simplistic. So basically, as an introduction for this particular impressions video, I just wanted to once again point out what this feels like is an Assassin's Creed mixed with Neo. And I'm saying this in the best possible way, because like I said, I am enjoying the game. However, I also feel at the same time that the asking price for the game is maybe a little bit too high in a year like 2024, where we're getting straight bangers left, right, and center, but naturally that is going to depend on the person who is purchasing the game, which is why I feel it's so important for me to really clarify in this open section that if you are someone who enjoys Team Ninja games, it's highly likely that you're going to enjoy this, so long as you are aware that this is not going to have the depth of combat of something like a Nioh 2. It has charged attacks, it has your standard combos, it has something similar to stances, but not quite, which I'll detail a little bit further in the combat section, even though there's going to be a decent chunk of repetition if you've watched my preview video. But the reason why it's not exactly like stances is because it works more like a rock, paper, scissors system. Right? So there's that. There's also martial arts. Well, not martial arts, martial skills, I think is what they're called, which is special attacks that you can do with your weapons. But again, those are also based on the combat style that you're on. So, you know, there's a lot of things that are limited based on the weapon that your enemy is using and the stance that you are then, therefore, kind of like forced to use. Even though there are some exceptions, because there's like these shinobi stances that you can have, but I didn't really get to play with those all that much because I wasn't able to unlock one for the weapon that I wanted to play. And the weapons themselves is actually something that I have to give props to Team Ninja because there's quite a lot of weapons in this game, including one of my favorite weapons that I already knew was in the game, but I wasn't actually allowed to speak about it because it came after the embargo period. But it is the bayonet. I love playing with the bayonet. It is a really interesting weapon that I haven't played with in a previous game because you're essentially using a rifle, kind of like, not really a sword, but in a similar manner, almost like a spear in a way. And then you can also shoot enemies with it. And some of the executions that you can do with the bayonet I thought were really cool. Another really cool aspect of it is the revolver. Like, I also unlocked the revolver after the embargo period, and the revolver also adds a little bit more depth to the combat because whereas in Nioh and whatnot, you would usually only pull out a ranged weapon in order to do a ranged attack, so you would have to be at a certain distance from your enemy, otherwise they're going to charge at you, and then you have to do proper aiming because usually in Nioh games, if you don't shoot them in the head, the damage that you actually do with a ranged weapon is not that much, depending on certain situations. But ideally, you want to be like far away enough that usually the ranged weapon is something that you use to begin the engagement, not necessarily something that you pull out midway through an engagement, unless there's specific openings and stuff like that, right? Now, on this game, as you unlock the revolver is a ranged option that you actually get to use in the middle of combat, and that I personally found very satisfying because you can also use the revolver as an execution for when you completely break an enemy's key gauge, and that was also very fun, and also seems to deal a decent chunk of damage, which is pretty good. But finally, overall, Assassin's Creed meets Nioh, all of that stuff. Now, very quickly, I'm going to run us through the usual shebang of like talking about visuals, sound, story, and all of these things. So, visuals, there's not a whole lot to say. You guys can see it on screen. I've heard a lot of people discuss this up and down, and at the end of the day, I think it is undeniable that the visuals are dated, and one of the things that I didn't notice as much at the beginning was that there are also some performance issues in the game. Now, the game has 3 distinct graphical options that you can play in, which is focusing graphics, focusing performance, or focusing ray tracing. I didn't notice that much of a difference between these. I'm going to be completely real. That's just the way that it is. I've tried them, and I looked at them, and I was like, I can't really tell much of a difference. So I went for performance, because obviously frame rate is very important for me. I should also point out that when it comes to the graphics mode, the game by default is locked at 30, but you can actually uncap the frame rate. There's an option to do that if that's something that you want to do, but that just made it really, really weird. I did not like that, and especially, like I said, I've experienced some performance issues even in performance mode later in the game, particularly as things start getting really busy or when it's raining and there's lots of grass animating and all of this stuff. The game does tend to get framey and quite a few dips below 60, so it's not straight up solid 60. And, you know, this is just part of that whole thing wherein visuals are dated, there's a couple of performance issues here and there. Is it really something that is game breaking? No. Is it something that is going to be a deal breaker for me? No, but it is something that is important for me to point out so that you guys know what you're getting yourselves into. When it comes to sound, everything feels pretty much okay. I didn't really feel too many issues with the voice acting. I think the voice acting is fine. I am playing the English version. I believe that you can also have Japanese audio, as is usual with these types of titles. But for me, everything sounds just fine. The sound of blades hitting blades and all of that stuff is good. The sound of flying when you are gliding with your glider, that's also good. The sound of the horse, everything sounds fine. Nothing really to point out. The soundtrack is pretty much okay. Nothing to write home about. There's nothing really that stands out to me. I think it's a pretty decent soundtrack. It does its job, but it's not something that I'm going to be listening to after I play through the game, if that makes sense. So that's kind of like where I land. If there is one thing that I would like, is I would like them to exaggerate gun sounds, but that's going to differ from person to person. Me, I like loud bangs, but I feel like what they've gone for here is actually a more realistic rifle sound and realistic revolver sounds for the time, because, you know, I just like big booms, but not naturally, that's not what is expected. And if they're trying to portray it more realistically, I think it makes sense the way that these sound. So, you know, that's visuals and sound. Now, talking specifically about story, I'm not going to get into spoiler territory or anything like that, but I actually really enjoy the story. I think the story is a ton of fun, and this was one of the things that I wanted to be able to talk more about during the preview window, but I wasn't able to. And the reasoning behind that is because there's some of the things that only open up after the preview. So, for instance, there's going to be 2 factions that you're going to be able to play for. And the way that those mechanics work, I actually thought was really cool, because basically you can choose as to whether you want to be a part of the pro-shogunate faction or a part of the anti-shogunate faction. And, you know, naturally my first inclination is like, I'm going to be against the government, all right? I'm not a government stooge. I'm going to be against them. I don't agree with what they're doing. Blah, 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 blah. That's your choice that you can make as you are going through the game. And then you have to kind of like navigate your relationship with certain characters in the game, because the way that characters work in this game is also important, that you kind of like, you give them gifts. There's all these social things you're supposed to do, which eventually also lead to character missions and stuff like that. And it is important for you to level them up, because it does have a gameplay impact. Leveling up certain characters impacts your ability with certain weapons. Now, this can be a double-edged sword, because maybe you don't like a certain character, but you like the weapon that they have. And that is going to be a problem, because you're going to be expected to actually socialize with this character, do missions with this character, if you really want to min-max, you know, that aspect. Like, straight up, some weapon unlocks are locked to specific characters, and if you don't raise those bonds, you are not going to be able to play that weapon efficiently. So keep that in mind. If this is something that bothers you, that's too bad. That's just going to be the way to go. You're going to have to figure out which character represents the weapon that you want to play, and you better get real close with that character so that you can actually get the maximum benefits of that weapon. Now, beyond that, in terms of the faction things, one of the things that I thought was interesting is naturally your character is going to have a motivation. Now, your starting motivation is going to be to find your blade twin. That's kind of like the very beginning of the story. You two get separated, and your character is kind of like trying to find, where is the blade twin? I want to find my blade twin. I want to save my blade twin. I want to get together with my blade twin, because when you start the game, you're going to create 2 characters, your main character and your blade twin. And your blade twin, I still don't know exactly the role that they're going to end up playing by the end of the story, but I have interacted with the blade twin in the story, and there's a little bit of intrigue there. But fundamentally, right, so I have this motivation. I'm trying to find the blade twin. So in the starting portion of the game, you're kind of being forced to play both sides, both factions. You're being forced to interact with characters from the shogunate as well as the anti-shogunate to see which one of the players in each faction is actually going to be able to give you the best clues as to where your blade twin is. Which was something that I thought was cool, because at one point I was working for the anti-shogunate faction, and then I ended up doing a mission for the shogunate, because I was like, oh, it seems like these guys have a really good lead as to where my blade twin is. And at the end of that mission, I was forced to fight one of the characters that was anti-shogunate. Now, I didn't kill that character, but it was interesting, because then I had to like make it up for that other character by doing a mission for them. Now, again, I don't know how much of this is scripted, because I've only been doing one playthrough so far. So I don't know exactly if this, it's supposed to go like that. But if it is, it's definitely doing a good job of hiding the systems behind it, to the point where I feel like I'm actually having a decent, what do you call it, decent amount of agency in the way that the story is being told. So story for me has actually been one of the better aspects of what I've experienced so far, and that is going to be something that you're going to be able to see through some of the gameplay videos that I'm going to be posting in the channel. So yeah, story so far has actually been one of the things that has kept me the most engaged. So now let's talk a little bit about the gameplay, and I kind of feel like the best way to describe the gameplay of Rise of the Ronin is fun but simple. So like, for instance, I've already said that the visuals feel a little bit dated. Another thing that also feels dated is the open world. So this is Team Ninja's I think it is their first foray into a full open world game, and it kind of shows. And in a lot of ways, I want them to kind of learn from this, because I want to see what they can do now that they understand how an open world can work and what are the things that players actually enjoy doing in open worlds and how they can kind of build on top of that. That is one of the things that I want to see, right? Now, the reason why I say that visuals are dated, but also open world is dated, is because what you are doing in this open world is not really that engaging. It's just basically the standard checkbox stuff, like, oh, go find these cats, go clear these camps, go kill these fugitives, find this treasure. It's basically stuff is like, go here, kill a couple of things, boom, you're done, right? Now, there's the occasional side quest that has a little bit more to it than that. So, for instance, one of the more meaningful side quests that I've enjoyed was I go through and I find this dude who's like, oh, I need to help my nephew or whatever it was. He's a samurai. His father was killed and they stole his armor and he's trying to get his armor back. And then I go through and I kill a bunch of people to recover some armor. At the end of the day, it's still a simple mission, right? Because it's still just going around killing people. But in the final portion of that mission, the young samurai actually dons like his father's armor and joins me in, you know, avenging the death of his father. And I was like, okay, this is kind of cool. So the side stories I actually find very engaging and I enjoy playing those. But the other stuff, like, oh, find cats, clear camps, that's not really that engaging. I guess killing fugitives is cool because there's kind of like a gameplay loop around that, wherein the way in which you get new combat styles for your weapon, which are essentially kind of like the stances of this game, the way in which you get new combat styles at the beginning is you have to find a fugitive that uses the same weapon that you're trying to get combat styles for. So let's say, for instance, you look at your combat tab in the game, and it tells you, okay, so for this weapon, there's somebody in this region, but they don't even tell you who it is, and you don't have an icon on the map. The idea is you're supposed to go to the region, do some stuff, because the more things that you do around the region, like some random open world activities or whatever, more things start revealing themselves to you, and eventually you will unlock the fugitive that is going to be somewhere in that map. And then once you kill that fugitive, you're going to gain that combat style. So in the beginning of the game, there's actually an interesting back and forth where you're kind of like discovering where these fugitives are and killing them. And that was engaging, but that ends fairly fast because you're going to be able to unlock all of your combat styles reasonably quick. I would say like in the first 15 hours or so of gameplay, maybe even faster. Depending on how much you beeline these types of objectives. So there is an interesting loop there with the fugitives and stuff, but after a while, killing fugitives is just the same as clearing out a camp. They really don't give you anything, so it's whatever, right? So that's what I meant when I say open world feels dated. They're not doing anything like groundbreaking or anything like that, and I'm not saying they have to. What they have to ensure is that what they are doing is fun, and to me, it is. It is a fun thing to go around just, doing random stuff in the world and doing the missions and all of that stuff. It's fine, but it's not exceptional, is where I'm getting at. Now, beyond all of the open world activities, most of the more significant things in the game are going to take place in missions. Now, these missions is where also you can do multiplayer, which is something that I wasn't allowed to talk about before, but you can do multiplayer in these missions, but the reality is I haven't really tested that because fundamentally I enjoy using the characters that are in the game, so I end up not really doing that much multiplayer, but it doesn't seem like there's a limitation like you've had in previous games where you need a Nochoko cup or whatever it was that you needed in order to summon other players. It's just like, hey, just cooperate, invite your friend over, and you guys can go do this mission together. Missions are also repeatable after a certain point in the game, so you can repeat missions and you can also go help your friends complete missions that they haven't done before, so that is a thing. But roaming the open world itself is not something that you're going to be doing in co-op, which was one of the questions that people were asking me. Open world is basically just you with your one character exploring the world, doing objectives, doing all of that stuff. Now, you will encounter what I believe to be characters from other players as you are in the open world. And for instance, you might be clearing out a camp and there might be a character from another player tied up there, and you can release them and they will help you defeat that camp. You can also just sometimes encounter roaming samurai from other players, and if you want, you can even engage them in combat, even though you don't have to, and usually that will raise like your wanted level and whatnot. These are systems that I haven't really interacted with that much because they don't seem that relevant. Just feels like extra features that they've added on top of the game, almost like co-op. I also feel that co-op just feels like something that they were, we can have these missions and players can play them in co-op if they want to, which I can appreciate. But it's not really something that I personally find super appealing in this thing, because usually when I think of co-op, I think of a seamless experience where I just bring people into my game and we all play the game and blah, blah, blah. But in here, it feels like it's more just about the missions. Okay, if you want to do multiplayer, all of that stuff, you go to the mission screen, you invite your friends, and you go do it. But the way that I've been doing it is I just choose the characters that I find more interesting, and I play with those characters on missions. Now, an important thing that I would like to point out is that I think that traversing the open world is actually really good. There's tons of fast travel on it, though, so you can pretty much almost just walk through the whole world if you really want to, because the teleport points are actually really spread out through the map in a way that it is not hard to get to where you're going once you unlock a specific travel point. It is super seamless, just like teleport around, all of that stuff. But at the same time, I can appreciate that they've put in a decent chunk of time into making traversal enjoyable in the form of, like, you can ride your horse, you can glide, and you can use your grappling hook, all in very seamless ways. So, like, you can be gliding and then you use your grappling hook to hook onto these kites that they have in the air, and that resets your ki reduction so you can keep gliding for a long period of time. Or you can be gliding downhill and then right as you're about to land, you call on your horse and you just jump onto your horse and you can continue running. So it feels very seamless, and sometimes even climbing to certain locations, because they put in like grappling hook spots and whatnot. You just climb up in there and you just do your thing. Exploration is okay, but traversal I do feel like is a very strong point for it. Now, again, like I mentioned, I am going to give you guys a bit of a detailed description of the combat for those of you that didn't watch my previous video. Square is going to be your basic combo. It can be charged, and triangle is going to be for parrying as well as critical hits. Now, the combat is going to utilize a ki system, which is essentially stamina for both you and the enemies. The idea is drain the entirety of the stamina for the enemy, and then you get to do a critical hit on the enemy. This critical hit can actually eventually be expanded upon. So at the beginning is just you hit triangle and you do a critical hit, which is going to be specific to your weapon. There's like a finishing animation, right? But eventually, if you are, for instance, using a revolver, you can instead finish enemies with a revolver shot by pressing L2, or you can also throw enemies at one another by using your rope. You can use the rope thing, and it just kind of like attaches to the enemy, throws them around. This is going to require you to invest some points into the skill tree that the game has, but it's fairly easy to get through. But yeah, the whole point is break enemy gauge, and after that, use a critical hit. Now, an important thing when it comes to this is that in order for you to really take advantage of breaking an enemy, there's going to be the stance system, which is called combat styles. And it is very much a rock, paper, scissors, so if an enemy has a great sword or whatever, you're going to be expected to play in chi mode or ten mode or jin mode, depending on which one is the counter. I don't know off the top of my head. But basically, when you press the button to swap stances, they're going to show you like arrows pointing up to tell you, okay, this is the advantageous thing to the dude that you're fighting right now. And that's going to be what you're expected to do, because naturally, if you go into the advantageous stance, the more you hit them, the easier it'll be to break their ki. And if you don't do that, if you stay in a stance that is disadvantaged, whatever, you guys get the idea. If you stay in the stance that is weak against the weapon that they are using, they're going to break your ki faster, which is going to make it significantly more challenging. Now, the problem with a system like this is that rather than you choosing stances based on the moveset that you want to use, you're choosing stances based on the enemy on the weapon that the enemy is using. Sometimes enemies change weapons, which means you need to change your stance as well. But fundamentally, you're always playing rock, paper, scissors, as opposed to choosing, no, I want to go here because I want this move, because I want this specific martial skill. No, it's not like that at all. So, your enemies also have martial skills, which give them like these red attacks, which the only way that you can actually block those is through a parry or dodging them. But you can't really invincibility frame through those, so you either have to not be there, or you have to perfect parry them, or you're going to get hit. You can block, very much like you could block in previous Team Ninja games. As a matter of fact, here's like a quick tip that I'm going to be putting in my beginner's guide video or whatever. You should hold your block when you are trying to parry, because that way if you mess up the parry, there's at least a chance that you'll be able to block if you're not animation locked into your parry. So keep that in mind. These combat styles require unlocking, like I've already mentioned. Different combat styles have different martial skills. There's a panic mechanic, which basically means when you hit an enemy enough times or when you parry an enemy enough times, their health bar goes red. And this is like, according to what I've seen in the game's guide, the idea, by game's guide, I mean there's an in-game guide that explains you all the mechanics and all that stuff. But according to what I've seen in the game's guide, their intended use seems to be you panic an enemy and then you use your martial skills on them. But the reality is, whenever you panic an enemy, that goes away so fast that a lot of times I don't even have time to do a martial skill. I don't know if this is due to the difficulty, because everything that I'm telling you is based on me playing on the hardest difficulty. And I'm not saying this as a flex, because people, a lot of times they seem to be like, oh, he's just flexing because he's playing in the hardest. I don't care. I like being challenged, even if I get my face beat up, okay? I like this. And I know that a lot of people don't seem to understand that or whatever. I don't care. I just want to make it perfectly clear. When I say that I'm playing on the hardest difficulty, it's not a flex. I'm just saying that because I like the challenge. If I didn't, I would play on the lower difficulty. And to be honest, another thing that I would point out is that I feel that this game is the easiest Team Ninja game that I've ever played. Because usually in Neo games, I'll get my face beat up repeatedly in certain boss fights, and I will stay stuck in there for like 1 hour, 2 hours of attempts. And in this game, that hasn't really happened. I think that most thing is probably like 10 tries on some of the bosses, which hasn't even happened that often, like maybe once or twice. And it was probably not 10 tries, I'm probably exaggerating, but I've never really been stuck in this game, where I have been stuck in Neo, both 1 and 2 quite often. Now, this could also be due to the fact that, very much like with Dark Souls games, the more you play those, the better you get. But I don't think that's the case. I just think that this is fundamentally an easier game, which also explains to me why a lot of the initial previews for the game were way more positive, because I guess it's more accessible, so a lot more people are enjoying that. I should also point out that this game has 3 difficulty levels, so you can play it in a much easier difficulty level. The only thing that the difficulty seems to have effect from some conversations that I've had with other content creators is that the enemy health. So they get more health, they deal more damage, blah, 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 blah. But it hasn't really felt super bloated, because I don't consider myself to be one of the more skilled players. Like, for instance, I think that Fighting Cowboy is a million times better than I am at any of these games. But I haven't really struggled that much, if that makes sense. Anyways, a couple of other mechanics that you have. You have Blade Flash, which is basically your key pulse. Works very much the same way that key pulse worked in previous games. If you've never played a Neo game, the way that this goes is you attack an enemy for an amount of time, and after that, you're supposed to press R1. And the idea in this game is that it just kind of like shakes off the blood from the blade, and that recovers some of your ki. So the idea is you go through and you attack an enemy until you run out of ki, and then you do a ki pulse and you recover some of that ki so that you can dodge, block, parry, or continue attacking, right? This game also has something called the blood gauge, which lets you know just how caked in blood your blade is, which means that you're going to recover more ki if you shake off blood when your blood gauge is completely full. There's also the grappling rope, which, like I've said, can be used for finishing attacks, can also be used as a gap closer, can be used in a variety of ways in combat. I appreciate the fact that they've included the grappling rope in combat, because sometimes, for instance, you might be fighting an enemy, and there might be barrels nearby, and you can actually yeet explosive barrels at enemies, which is very useful. Sometimes you can even yeet an enemy at another enemy, which is also useful and is cool. There's also a mechanic wherein you can swap characters. This only happens in missions, so this is not going to be something that you're going to be doing while you're doing open world activities or anything of the sorts, but if you are in a mission, usually you will be able to be playing with other NPC characters, and you can swap between characters. And this is actually a pretty cool mechanic, even though I started using it less and less the more I've played, because I began mastering the weapon that my character is using, the bayonet, and usually I just like playing with that weapon more so than playing other characters. But I have noticed that if I am pressed against a certain enemy, one of the tactics that I will sometimes resort to is I will unload the entirety of my ki by just constantly attacking an enemy with everything I've got, and then when I run out of ki, I swap to the other character, and the enemy is probably going to be targeting my first character, so the AI takes over and just kind of like starts blocking, right? Not really parrying, but just blocking and being defensive. And in the meantime, I come in with the other character from behind, slash away at him, burn down all of that ki, then swap characters again, because at that point, the boss will probably swap aggro to the other character that was dealing more damage. So this consistent swapping is also something that gives you a combat advantage. Now, it doesn't make combat super easy. It's still, you still have to have some mastery of combat. You can't just like unload ki. You need to know when you can do this. But, I do find that particular mechanic interesting, and it is one of the more unique mechanics that you can do in this game that adds a little bit of complexity, because you're going to be required to know the movesets of different characters, and this might be the reason why Team Ninja simplified the combat somewhat, because they want you to be able to swap characters easily and intuitively be able to use their movesets, even though I'm still not able to use the movesets of other characters. Intuitively, I usually just like swap character, mash square, hope for the best. But yeah, beyond all of this, there's also stealth mechanics, which this is one of the reasons why I brought up Assassin's Creed at the beginning of the video, is because I use a lot of stealth whenever it comes to this game. I usually jump in whenever I'm clearing camps or anything like that. I'll find the tall grass, I'll kill enemies, and there's a lot of options when it comes to stealth, which I really like. Like, you'll eventually get skills that allow you to perform 3 assassinations in a row. If you're able to get 3 enemies close enough, you'll be able to very quickly assassinate. At least 2 of them I've done. I don't think I've done 3, but I think you can do more than 2. So you can just like kill enemies very fast with stealth, which is cool. You can also yank them with the rope that you have and do an aerial assassination like that. There's a lot of options when it comes to stealth in this game, and that is one of the things that I appreciate, and I usually play it very much stealth, which does also make things significantly easier, but it is what it is. Hopefully this gives you a better idea of what to expect. I think that one of the cooler things in this game, and this is a very much a me thing, is the fact that I get to play bayonet with a rifle and I can shoot people, and you also have a revolver. So basically, I'm not really a samurai or a Ronin. I'm a gun-murai. I'm basically running around with 2 guns. I have the one gun that has a blade in the end, which is almost like a gun lance, and I slash people and then I blow them away. And then I have the other gun, which is the revolver. And the revolver is actually a fun thing. Sometimes I'll be fighting certain enemies, and they're like tough enemies, so it takes me a while to get through their health, and near the end, I'm out of potions, I'm out of everything, the enemy's about to die, but they're still coming on pretty strong. I'll just run away and gun them down. It's so satisfying. I'll just gun them down with a revolver. It's a lot of fun. So there's a lot of fun things about this game, which is one of the things that I said in my preview is like, I'm still enjoying the game, I'm still playing the game. But at the same time, I feel it is important that people are informed of what they are getting. And the reality is, the visuals feel dated, the open world feels dated, a lot of the game feels dated, and one of the things that a lot of people associate with Team Ninja is the complexity of Neo's combat, which this combat is not as complex as Neo. Yes, it has parries, you can parry bullets and make your weapon go on fire and all of that stuff. It's got cool things. But at the end of the day, I just want people to be aware that it is simpler. If you are okay with that, I think you will enjoy the game. but at the same time, I feel like its price point is a little bit high. I would be much more comfortable recommending this game at like $40 to $50 range than I am recommending it at $70. So at this point, I would say you're better off waiting for maybe a discount, unless you are a Team Ninja mega fan, at which point most likely you know what you're getting after this lengthy video, and I don't think you're going to be disappointed. Like, if you want open world Neo, this is open world Neo. Just be aware that a lot of the things are, not open world Neo, like I said, a crossover between Assassin's Creed and Neo. Just be aware that a lot of the things don't have the same depth as Neo. And this is my opinion. I know that there's going to be people that are going to disagree with that, and that's fine. That is perfectly fine, because what is most important to me is that you are well informed to make your decision. That's it. Anyway, that's going to be it for this video. Hopefully this helped you out, make up your mind in regards to Rise of the Ronin. There's going to also be a gameplay series that is going to be in my channel. These are going to be very lengthy VODs with tons and tons of gameplay, so you can check those out if you want to learn more about the game. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay strong, stay safe, peace out.